I do not work for the University of Wyoming. So I wanted to let you know that that is where I got all my information from. So there is, I think it's a 1 or 2 page publication called Raising Small Fruits in Wyoming that you can easily find online. And all the cultivar recommendations that I will give you today came from that publication. There are also a whole bunch of fruit publications out of the University of Idaho. So if you go to this website, and I'll show it again at the end, you can search by what kind of berry you're thinking of growing, and they'll give you tons of information. And they tend to be very long documents, 20 to 40 pages. So probably more information than you even want if you're just starting to grow berries. So again, my name is Connie Fisk. My background is actually in fruit production. I just completed my PhD this last semester doing research on peaches. But before that, I worked with berries. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So why berries? Last year when I spoke at this event, I was talking all about landscaping. So using fruits to landscape in our yards rather than just planting ornamentals. So that's one good reason. They're also very easy to grow, and you can't beat fresh fruit. They don't require a lot of sprays for pests because we tend to only grow, a bush here, a couple vines there, so we're not doing concentrated monoculture, so we don't see the pest problems that commercial growers see. We can get some fruit production the year after planting. If you grow an apple tree, it's going to be several years before you get apples, but if you grow berries, you're going to get fruit probably in that second year and definitely in the third. They're pretty efficient as far as space, so you can plant just a couple shrubs. They're not going to take up a large part of your yard. And as I said, they do make excellent shrubs and hedges. They look very good in the landscape. You can actually use them to keep deer out of the yard if you plant a nice hedge of raspberries, for example. They attract birds and bees who are always trying to support local bees, and some of them have really great fall foliage. There are a number of things you should look at before planting. You can always, and it's one of the jokes, I guess, in extension when someone says, hey, can I grow this? Well, you can grow anything if you want to throw enough money at it. But if you don't want to throw that much money at it, these are some things to look at before you plant fruit. So you want to choose a site with full sun. Most fruit production is going to require sunlight. So if your yard is full of trees and there's no sunlight, it may be challenging to get fruit production. You want to avoid planting near trees or large shrubs that are going to compete for moisture and nutrients. Again, to grow fruit, you're going to need water. It's important to check your soil. The big thing is pH, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But also if there's any toxicities there or deficiencies of nutrients. And then look at which small fruit varieties are best suited to your climate. And that's what I'm going to cover today. Don't buy from Home Depot. They're going to carry stuff that can grow in Colorado, it might grow in Oregon. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best variety for growing here in Sheridan. So again, I'm going to tell you the recommended varieties for Wyoming, and you can go by that, or go with someone like Landon's, who has done their own research. They can make recommendations for what they know will grow here. Determine when is the best time to plant, how to plant. So again, that's important. You spend all this money on plants, you don't want to kill them right off the bat. And understand that fruit production requires annual pruning. So that's something that you have to be committed to before you plant these. So again, a word about soil pH. Strawberries, raspberries, gooseberries, most of our fruit crops are going to require slightly acidic soil. Wyoming soil is not acidic. It tends to actually be pretty high in pH, about 7 to 8.5. So that's something that you're going to be fighting for the life of that plant. And that's why we can't grow blueberries in Wyoming soil. So Wyoming soil is very high in limestone, which is calcium carbonate. So even if you add sulfur to bring that pH down, the calcium carbonate is going to be constantly breaking down and fighting to push that pH back up. So it's really going to be a constant battle. Blueberries are not a sustainable option for this area. One of the reasons why pH is so important, even in the landscape, is because pH affects nutrient availability. So one of the things you'll hear about if you have landscape plants and their leaves start turning yellow, one of the common problems is iron deficiency chlorosis. So what you can see here is once the pH gets up, 7 to 8, you can see the iron bar here gets smaller and smaller. So even if you have iron available in your soil, the plant, it's not going to be available for the plant to take it up. So that's why most of our fruit plants are going to like to be slightly acidic, somewhere in here, so they have good access to all those nutrients. All right, the next thing that's important to figure out before you buy plants is what is your hardiness zone? And this is easy to find online if you just look up plant hardiness zones. For Sheridan, you can see our zone is about zone 4. So when you're looking for plants, make sure they're hardy to zone 4. If you buy a strawberry plant or a raspberry plant that has a 5 or a 6, chances are it's going to receive some cold damage here at Sheridan. On the other hand, if you get something that's a zone 3, that's going to be pretty hardy here, even in a cold year. All right, so for this presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on strawberries and raspberries, because those are kind of the two most common, and then I'll run through a few of the minor berries. So back to that UW publication, these are the recommended strawberry varieties. That publication came out in 2009. So there may be a few newer ones. Again, I would check with Landon's. And they do carry several of these. It's important to know that strawberries come in different groups. So we have June bearers, where you're going to get one crop, June and July. We have ever bearers, where you'll probably get 2 crops, one earlier in the summer and then one towards fall. And then we have day neutrals, which can produce fruit over the entire season. So you may want to plant a couple different varieties to spread out that harvest period. And these numbers in parentheses are those hardiness zones. So again, if you know you're on a very cold site, you might want to pick some of the varieties that have a 3. With strawberries, you'll get fruit in 1 to 2 years. You could get some fruit in the first year, but it's really detrimental to the plant, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You can get anywhere from 1/3 to 2 pounds per plant. So you can keep that in mind with how many plants do I need for the size of my family. On average, if you have 4 people in your family and you like strawberries a lot, you're going to want about 50 plants. Life expectancy for these plants is 3 to 5 years. If you are saving the daughter plants, they're going to constantly renew. So it's not that you're going to have to replant every 3 to 5 years. For home production, strawberries are grown in raised beds. They can be grown in pyramids. You can grow them in old tires, hanging baskets. The options are limitless. But a lot of home growers, if they're growing, again, a large number of plants, are going to use a matted row system. And with that system, you have a mother plant, and it's going to send out runners with daughter plants, and those daughter plants are going to root. And pretty soon, you have a bed that's filled in with strawberries. So that's pretty common for the home gardener. As far as when to plant strawberries, you want to wait until the temperature is above 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And then plant the plants so the roots are spread out. June bearers and ever bearers, you want them to be about 12 to 18 inches apart, with 3 to 4 feet between rows. Again, they're going to fill in the in-between spaces. Day neutrals, you can plant a little closer together, about 9 inches apart, but again, the rows are going to be 3 to 4 inches. Make sure you cover the roots until the crown is just above the soil surface. And so that's what's shown here. This plant was planted too shallow, so it's not deep enough. This one is just right, and this one is too deep. So both the too shallow and too deep are going to cause problems. And don't fertilize when you plant them. If you're going to amend the soil, you want to do that well before planting so that those materials have time to work in. During the first year, you want to pinch off all the flowers. It's really tempting. You see flowers, I know I'm going to get strawberries. But the first year, the plant really needs to put all its energy into establishing the plant. So you want to pinch off the flowers and make it wait to produce fruit until the second year. And if you're growing day neutrals, you can get some fruit in the fall. Just pinch them off until about August, again, to give that plant time to establish. Make sure you irrigate regularly. And if you're using overhead irrigation, do it early in the morning so it can dry out so you're not going to cause disease. Keep control of the weeds. That's always the problem here. And use mulch, which does help with the weeds. Fertilization, you can use a balanced fertilizer like 10-10-10. Recommendations for June bearers and day neutrals. I don't have time, I think, to spend reading through them, but again, these are all in those Idaho publications online. Just some additional things to keep in mind if you're trying to grow strawberries is to not plant them where you've previously had tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, eggplants, melons, cherries, raspberries, roses, or chrysanthemums, because they are susceptible to verticillium wilt. Make sure you continue to irrigate them in the fall to prevent desiccation. Mulch them in the winter, and then in the early spring, rake that mulch back away from the plants. All right, that's strawberries. Next, I'm going to go through raspberries. This is a beautiful red raspberry plant. But we also have different colors of raspberries. So, for example, here's Fall Gold, which is a yellow raspberry, and we also have some black raspberries. Some other vocabulary that goes along with raspberries. We have summer bearers, which give us one crop of raspberries, early to midsummer. And these are the floricane fruiting varieties. So these are the ones that develop fruit on the second year of a cane. So this year it'll grow, but it won't have any fruit. You have to let that cane grow again for a second year, and that's when you're going to get your fruit. So a lot of our traditional raspberries, that's how they were grown. But now we have a lot of primocane fruiting varieties. And primocane fruiting means that we'll get fruit the first year. These are also fall bearers. So we'll get one crop in the summer and another crop in the fall. A lot of commercial growers that grow primocane fruiting varieties actually mow them. So that would save you a lot of labor having to prune raspberries if you could just mow them. That also helps reduce disease and insect problems. And again, by growing several different cultivars, you can lengthen that harvest season. So these are the raspberry varieties recommended for Wyoming, and again, the numbers are hardiness zones. So we have red summer bearing varieties. Again, those are the ones that you're going to have to let the cane grow 2 years before you'll get fruit. And then we have the fall bearing or primocane fruiting varieties. So again, if you mowed these every year, you would still get fruit every year. We have yellow fall bearing variety called Fall Gold, and that was the one I showed in the picture. Then we have black raspberries and purple raspberry. The purple raspberry is just a cross between the black and the red. Something to keep in mind with raspberries is if you're growing a lot of different varieties, you don't want to be growing the red ones and the purple ones and the yellow ones next to the black raspberries. And that's because black raspberries are not as resistant to diseases, and so they can cause disease problems than in your other raspberry varieties. They actually recommend a buffer of 75 to 100 feet, which may be a bit too much for someone's backyard. On the other hand, there are people that are like, well, there's wild berries everywhere, so there's no point in fighting it, and there's people that plant them. So that's just a risk you have to weigh. With raspberries, you're going to get fruit in 2 to 3 years. Again, you're not going to get fruit that first year. If you're growing a primocane fruiting variety, you'll probably get fruit the second year. You can get 2 to 4 pounds per hill or plant. So if you have a 4-person household, 6 plants is probably good enough to start. And again, they will also spread a lot. And they'll remain productive for 8 to 12 years, depending on the disease pressure. So things to think about before planting raspberries. Choose a well-drained site because you don't want to get root rot. If you do have a poorly drained site, plant in a raised bed. So if you have a very high clay soil, you can amend it, but also planting in a raised bed will help with that problem. Avoid windy sites, or you can use a trellis or a windbreak to help protect them. Brambles benefit from compost or well-rotted manure incorporated into the soil before you plant. Again, I recommend a soil test. It's not as convenient around here as some of the other places I've lived, but they do sell kits at some of the garden centers, and the big thing you're looking for is pH. And then prepare the bed, usually the fall before you want to plant. So again, it lets those materials, if you've added any amendments, have time to work in, and then it's ready to go in the spring as soon as the weather cooperates. As far as spacing, again, raspberries are going to spread, so you want to make sure you give them a lot of room. You can see here 2 feet apart, 3 feet apart, and again, all that information is online. I mentioned trellising. A lot of people grow raspberries as a hedge and don't worry about trellising, but it's something you might want to think of, especially if it's on a really windy site. It helps keep the canes and the fruit off the ground. And it also helps with other management practices. If you're spraying herbicides or you need to mow by the raspberries, it's kind of nice to have them contained. Red and yellow summer-bearing raspberries are usually supported using posts or trellis wires like this I-trellis. Fall-bearing cultivars can be grown without support, but again, if you have that trellis, it makes it easier. You want to transplant your plants as soon as the ground becomes workable in the spring. Dig a trench and spread the roots horizontally, and then cover them with 3 to 4 inches of soil. If your plants come in a container, you can plant them anytime, but the earlier in the season that you plant them, the sooner they'll get established, and therefore the sooner you'll get fruit. You want to remove from the pots and bury them so that they're covered by at least a ½ inch of soil. So you're going to bury them a little bit deeper than they were in the pot. And don't prune them right away. Make sure you keep them watered. Again, mulching is helpful to keep your plants moist. It also helps with weed control. Raspberries require irrigation from bloom through harvest. Again, that's going to affect your berry size. And then you can reduce watering after the first frost to encourage them to harden off. So if you keep watering them, they're going to keep growing. So we want them to kind of slow down and go to bed for the winter. And a late fall watering after the plants are dormant will help prevent winter injury. So just like with the strawberries, you don't want to let them completely dry out in the fall because then that can cause some damage from desiccation. Fertilizer, again, you can use a balanced fertilizer like 10-10-10 on raspberries, but they are very sensitive to chlorides. So again, make sure you read the label on your fertilizer to make sure it doesn't contain chlorides. I mentioned iron deficiency chlorosis. If your soil pH starts to get up there, you can see some leaf symptoms, which basically the leaves will start to turn yellow. So to prevent that, again, try to avoid heavy alkaline soils, avoid overwatering. You can use sulfur to reduce the soil pH, which will help. And if it's a common problem, you can add iron with your fertilizer. Pruning, you're going to prune every year to remove weak and damaged vines, remove all the dead canes. So after they've produced fruit in the fall, they're dead. They're not going to come back. They're not going to produce fruit again. So you cut those out and let the new ones take over that space. That helps improve light and air movement, so it's going to keep diseases down and it's going to keep fruit production up. So for summer bearing red and yellow raspberries, in late fall to early spring, you'll thin them out and head them back to about 6 feet tall. So you really do want to keep them contained in their bed. You're going to leave 4 to 6 of the strongest canes for every foot. So that's something that's easy. Everybody can imagine in their mind how big a foot is, and you're only going to leave 4 to 6 canes in that foot. So you really are cutting out a lot every year. You're going to try to leave the healthy canes. You don't want to leave big fat ones because they're called bull canes and they tend to not produce any fruit. But you do want to leave good sized ones that look really healthy. And make those cuts close to the ground because again, you're going to be maintaining this planting for several years, maybe decades. And you don't want to leave those little sticks sticking up. For fall-bearing raspberries, you'll prune them in the late fall, removing all those spent floricanes and the spent tops of the primocanes as well. In the spring, we don't thin them out, but just really keep them in a hedge about 18 inches wide. And as I mentioned before, they can be mowed if you only want to have one crop per year. Black and purple raspberries, we're going to tip those primocanes. Again, the primocanes are the ones that grew this year. We're going to tip them back. That's the terminal 2 to 3 inches on the end. We're going to tip those back in the summer so that they make side shoots, and that's where we're going to get the fruit. Just a few additional points about raspberries. They're also susceptible to verticillium wilt like the strawberries, so you want to avoid planting them in those same areas around tomatoes or potatoes. Nursery-grown plants nearly always grow better than transplants because they're not going to bring in as many of the diseases. So yeah, my neighbor has a really great raspberry. I think I'll just go take some cuttings from that. The problem is that I'm bringing all my neighbor's pests and diseases to my yard. Overhead sprinkling can encourage diseases. So again, if you're going to use overhead irrigation, you want to do it early in the morning so it can dry out. Or use drip irrigation. And raspberries spread underground. So if you want to keep them contained in that bed, you need to bury metal. So like roofing material, about 14 inches into the soil so that those roots can't spread. All right, moving on to gooseberries. This is a minor crop here. Not a lot of people grow gooseberries, but it is a nice bush to have in the landscape, and plus you get fruit off it. And currants are related to gooseberries as well. So I'll cover both of those. They're generally self-fruitful, so if you have a small yard and can only plant one bush, you're still going to get fruit. Let's see. They're a minor crop in the U.S., so there aren't a lot of pesticides for them. If you were to develop a disease that you needed to spray your bush for, it may be difficult to find those products. You're going to get 4 to 8 quarts of gooseberries or currants per bush. You'll get fruit in 2 years, but they may continue to produce for 12 or more years. These are the recommended varieties. Again, several of them are very cold tolerant. These don't do very well under either dry or waterlogged soils. So again, thinking of your yard, you probably have some different climate issues in your yard. Gooseberries and currants will tolerate partial shade, where the raspberries and strawberries really do need full sunlight. You want to make sure you get rid of all the weeds before you plant them, because weeds are really a problem after you plant. Again, you're going to plant about 1 inch deeper than it was in the pot. And you can space these about 3 feet apart if you want to make a gooseberry hedge. And then if you're going to plant more of them, they need to be 6 feet apart. Black currants in particular are more vigorous, so they need to be spaced a little further apart. Again, generally they're self-fruitful, so if you only have room to plant one, you'll still get fruit. But if you have room to plant more than one, you'll get better yields from that cross-pollination. After planting, they should be pruned back to about 4 to 6 shoots. And the resulting low bud count will encourage that plant to send out new wood. At planting time, you should also use some sort of mulch, so they also benefit from mulch. We fertilize gooseberries and currants in the spring, again using a balanced fertilizer, about 1/4 to 1/2 pound of fertilizer per bush, depending on the size of the plant and how vigorous it is. And you're going to put that in a band all the way around the plant, gently working it into the soil. And if you're using compost material, again, we heard earlier, you want to make sure it's well composted, but apply that in late fall, because it's going to take longer for that to break down. Pruning is going to encourage vigor, which is going to encourage fruit production. It's going to improve sunlight into that canopy, which is important for fruit production. And with better air circulation, you have less disease. So by the 3rd year, we're going to prune back to 4 to 5 canes. During the first 3 years of growth, we're going to allow 4 to 5 canes every year. And then we're just going to cut out the weaker, damaged ones. Beginning in the 4th year, we're going to prune out the oldest wood every year. So again, that's something you've got to sign up for if you're planting fruits, is that annual pruning. And any weak new growth. So if it's something that's really thin and twiggy and you know it's not strong enough to support a fruit load, go ahead and prune that out. So a mature bush should have about 9 to 12 canes after you prune. And we actually, in gooseberries and currants, we get fruit on 1, 2, and 3-year-old wood. So it's not like raspberries where you're limited to a certain age of wood. You're going to get gooseberries and currants on 1, 2, and 3-year-old wood. All right, got 4 minutes left. Again, just some minor berries that do grow well here and look good in the landscape. Saskatoons, which are also known as Juneberries and service berries, mountain blueberries, we heard about them earlier. You can get 4 to 6 quarts of fruit off of one bush. You're going to get fruit in 2 to 3 years, but they're going to continue to produce for 40 years. Again, if you're maintaining them, you're pruning them, you can get fruit for 40 years. And these are the 3 varieties that are recommended here, all zone 4. The next one is elderberries. Usually they're just called elderberries. If you go to a store and see, a pot for sale, they're not going to tell you which variety, but they should give you some indication of how hardy it is on that tag. So again, you want to make sure you're looking for at least zone 4. They're partially self-fruitful, but this is another one that's going to benefit from cross-pollination. So if you can have a couple different elderberries growing, you'll get more fruit. They're actually really easy to grow and they don't require a lot of work, which is nice. You can get 3 to 4 quarts of fruit per plant. They'll start to produce in 2 years and they'll be productive for 12 or more years. All right. And then as I said, all this information came from these publications. So from the University of Wyoming, there's a 2-page publication called Raising Small Fruits in Wyoming. Very delicious. Again, it's very to the point. It gives you these variety recommendations. And that's the website. It's that barnyard to backyard website. So if you search for berries, I think it's the top one that comes up. And it'll give you all those recommendations as well as their hardiness zones. And then the University of Idaho, if you go to their catalog and search by berry, they also have a bunch. So they have one for strawberries, they have one for raspberries and blackberries, one for currants, gooseberries, and jostaberries, one for saskatoons, and a more of a generalized one for short season gardens, because we have very short season gardens here. I also found one this morning that was specific for fertilizing berry crops. So again, I recommend both of these websites. Any questions? I know that was really fast, but again, it's all on these websites. There's a lot more information than I was able to cover in this half hour. So if you're interested in one of these berries, I encourage you to go download that entire publication.